The text arrived at 10:13 a.m., right when I was trying to convince myself that normal people don't recheck the same email chain 3 times like it's going to confess to something. Tessa. I'm at my grandma's funeral. Don't call. I need space to grieve. Funeral, space, don't call. 3 words that don't belong together unless someone is practicing for a role. I stared at the message until the little delivered started to feel personal, like the universe was underlining it for me. There. You got it. Now be a good fiancé and believe. I set my phone face down on the counter like it might stain the granite. The kitchen was too clean. The kind of clean you get when you live with someone who believes in aesthetic peace but can't remember to pay the water bill without 3 reminders. There was a half-finished wedding binder on the table, color swatches, vendor invoices, an obsessive spreadsheet of table assignments like we were seating world leaders and not my uncle who thinks every conversation is a debate. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the clock ticking, the house doing what houses do when nothing is wrong. Except something was wrong. Not because she texted about a funeral. People have funerals. People have grief. People need space. I'm not a monster. I know how to shut up and show up and hold a hand without making it about me. But Tessa's version of grief always came with stage directions. Last month, when her co-worker's dog passed away, she posted a black and white photo of a candle and wrote, "Loss changes you." The dog belonged to someone she'd met twice, and she spelled its name wrong. She'd been polishing her sorrow voice lately, like she'd been rehearsing. My phone buzzed again, and my body reacted before my brain did. Not fear, not shock. Something colder. The kind of instinct you get when you've spent years in compliance meetings listening to people swear they absolutely followed protocol while you're staring at the photo evidence of the opposite. Another text. Tessa. Please respect this. I can't handle questions today. Questions. Right. Because questions are what destroy relationships. Not lies. Not disappearing. Not using tragedy as a do not disturb sign. I picked up the wedding binder and flipped to the page where she'd taped a little printed quote in cursive. Love is choosing each other every day. It looked expensive. It looked sincere. It looked like something you buy when you want to feel like a good person without doing the messy part of being one. My thumb hovered over her contact photo, the little smiling headshot she'd made me take at that vineyard last fall. Perfect lighting, perfect angle, perfect teeth. Don't call, she said. So I didn't. I did what I always do when something feels off. I verified reality. Work was completely quiet, which should have been a gift. Our office is a squat brick building by the marina with fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look like they're either sick or guilty. I'm the guy who gets called when someone wants to open a venue, host an event, run electrical, put up staging, anything that gathers a crowd and a lawsuit in the same place. My job is simple. People want to skip steps. I make them justify every step. Nina leaned over the divider with her coffee like she'd been waiting for me to arrive. Nina. You look like you slept in a spreadsheet. Me. I did. It was intimate. She smirked, then her eyes narrowed in that way that said she'd already read something in my face. Nina. Wedding stress. Or the other thing? There it was. The other thing. The last few weeks of Tessa's phone lighting up at 2 a.m., the sudden girls' nights, the new habit of flipping her screen face down like it was a ritual, the little lies that weren't big enough to accuse, just big enough to make you feel insane. Me. Funeral. Nina blinked. Funeral? I nodded like it was normal. Nina. Her grandma? Me. Apparently. Nina's expression did something that wasn't quite skepticism, not quite pity, more like recognition. Nina. Huh. That landed hard, because Nina doesn't funerals. She huhs people who lie badly. I sat at my desk, opened a permit file, tried to pretend I cared about emergency egress widths, while my phone sat heavy in my palm. You know how you can feel when someone's story has too many commas? Like the sentence is being held together by decoration? That's what her funeral text felt like. I didn't go digging through her phone. I didn't hire a private investigator. I didn't do anything dramatic because dramatic is what liars count on. They want you to explode so they can call you unstable and move the conversation to your reaction instead of their actions. So I did the least dramatic thing on earth. I opened Instagram. I wasn't looking for her. Not consciously. I was looking for distraction. Scrolling through strangers' dogs and sponsored fitness tips and the comforting illusion that everyone else's life is boring in an orderly way. Then I saw it. A live video thumbnail, pulsing with that little red badge, Lev. The account was some festival page I didn't follow. Someone had tagged it in a local story. I almost kept scrolling, but the audio started playing on its own. Bass, screaming, that thin electronic whistle that makes your teeth itch. The caption said, Coachella Day 2, VIP area. Coachella. My thumb stopped. My brain tried to negotiate. Not her. Couldn't be her. Tessa doesn't even like dust. Tessa treats sand like it's a personal insult. I tapped the live. The camera shook through a crowd of glitter and sunburn and expensive sunglasses. Someone screamed into the mic about energy. The image swung toward a cluster of people behind a rope, wristbands flashing like status symbols. And there she was. Not a maybe. Not a looks like. Not a trick of light. Tessa Ward, my fiancée, wearing a white crochet top she'd bought for the honeymoon, laughing with her head tilted back, like grief had never touched her life. A man stood behind her with his arm draped too casually across the back of her chair. He leaned in and said something in her ear. She swatted him like he'd earned the right. Her hand lingered on his wrist, familiar, comforting, the kind of touch that says, I've done this before. The camera zoomed for no reason other than cruelty. His face came into focus. Dylan Crowe. The name hit me before the memory did. Then the memory followed like a late freight train. Dylan, the ex she called ancient history, the guy she said she hadn't spoken to in years, the one she described with that careful tone that's supposed to sound indifferent but always sounds rehearsed. My body went hot and cold at the same time, like I'd stepped into ocean water in winter. I watched her laugh again, watched him lean closer, watched her angle her body toward him like gravity was optional when he was around. My first impulse was to call, to break the don't call rule like it was a challenge. Instead, I opened our text thread and typed 2 words. Me. My condolences. I hit send. Then I did something I didn't even know I was capable of. I smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was clean, because it was the first honest thing in the entire situation. I took a screenshot of the live stream, then another with the timestamp visible. I clicked her parents' contact thread, Gail and Robert, where the last message was, Gail asking if we'd decided between ivory or champagne napkins like that was a real problem in the world. Before I could overthink it, my finger moved. I pasted the link. I added a single line. Me. She said she was at a funeral. This is live right now. I stared at it for a full second. Then I pressed send. The phone felt light afterward, too light, like I'd released something I'd been holding for weeks without noticing. A few seconds passed, then a minute. Then my screen lit up with Gail's name. Incoming call. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because across my desk, Nina was watching me like she could hear the sound a lie makes when it collapses. And because on the live stream, Dylan leaned in again, and Tessa's smile faltered, just a fraction, as if someone had walked over her grave. My phone buzzed with a new message from Tessa. Tessa. Evan. Why are you doing this? I stared at the words until the bass from the live stream felt like it was coming from inside my skull. Then my phone rang again. Not Gail this time. Tessa. I lifted it to my ear, and behind her voice, thin, trembling, carefully wounded, I heard the crowd roar, the music surge, the unmistakable sound of a festival speaker blowing out someone's fake funeral. Tessa, please, don't. I can explain. I didn't let her finish. I didn't hang up either. Hanging up would have been dramatic. I just held the phone away from my ear long enough to let the music bleed through clearly, unmistakably, like evidence you don't have to label. When I brought it back, my voice surprised me. It was steady, almost bored. I said, "You should lower the volume. Funerals usually don't have bass drops." Silence, not the clean kind, the scrambling kind. I could hear her breathing speed up the way it does when she's calculating instead of feeling. Tessa, you're being cruel. There it was. Step 1, not denial, accusation. Me, you lied about someone dying. Another pause. Then the crowd noise shifted like she'd turned her body away from the phone, trying to protect the illusion. Tessa, I needed space. Me, you needed cover. She inhaled sharply. I pictured her scanning faces, checking if Dylan was watching, if anyone could read panic the way I could. She'd always underestimated how visible she became when she lost control. The smile stiffened. The sentences got shorter. Tessa, I can come home tonight. We'll talk. Home. The word hit wrong, like she'd already rehearsed saying it, already decided it still belonged to her. Me. No, just that. One syllable. It landed heavier than a paragraph ever could. Tessa. Evan, don't do this. My parents, me, are with your grandma right now. That finally broke something. She made a sound I'd never heard before. Not crying, not anger, a kind of exposed noise, like the moment right before glass shatters. Tessa, you sent them that? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was already doing the work for me. I ended the call before she could pivot again, before she could find a way to make herself the center of gravity. My phone vibrated immediately after. Not a call, a text. Tessa, please, I'll explain everything. Just don't talk to anyone else. I set the phone face down on the desk. Nina didn't pretend not to notice anymore. Nina, that wasn't a funeral. Me, no. Nina exhaled slowly, like she was letting go of something she'd been holding for my sake. Nina, I'm sorry. I nodded. Sorry was appropriate. It was also insufficient. I left work early. No announcement, no performance. Just a quiet exit, like I'd done 100 times after inspections that went badly for someone who thought rules were optional. The drive home felt unreal, like I was moving through a set someone else had built. Every red light stretched. Every billboard felt personal. I passed the florist we'd booked, the bakery that knew Tessa by name, the little park where she'd insisted we take engagement photos because it feels timeless. Timeless. Right. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same as it had that morning. White siding, blue door. Wind chimes she'd picked because they sounded coastal. I stood there for a second with the engine off, hands on the steering wheel, listening to the ticking sound cars make when they're cooling down. It reminded me of countdowns. Inside, I didn't rush. I didn't throw things. I didn't yell at empty rooms like that helps anything. I went to the closet. Her side was immaculate, color-coordinated, shoes lined up like a showroom. I reached for one of her dresses and felt something hard in the pocket. A wristband, thin plastic, neon. Coachella printed across it like a punchline. I laughed then, just once. A sharp sound that startled even me. I placed the wristband on the bed. Then I started packing. Not angrily, methodically. I folded things the way she liked them folded. I wrapped her jewelry in tissue paper. I placed shoes back in their boxes, not because I was being kind, but because I refused to let her rewrite this later as me losing control. Her phone charger, her makeup bag, the jacket she always stole from me and claimed it smelled like safety. Each item went into a suitcase, then another. I carried everything to the porch. The sun was still out. Neighbors walked dogs. A couple jogged past, earbuds in, lives intact. I stacked her bags neatly by the door like she was checking out of a hotel. My phone buzzed again. Gail, Evan, please call me. Then another. Robert, we need to talk. I answered that one. Robert didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He sounded tired in a way that told me the truth had already hit. Robert, we're on our way. Me, okay. And that was it. They arrived 20 minutes later. Gail's eyes were red. Robert's jaw was set in that rigid way men get when they're holding anger in a vice. Gail, is she really? Me, at a festival? Yes. She covered her mouth, not in shock, in shame. Robert looked at the bags, then at me. Robert, she's coming home. I nodded. Me, I know. We stood there in silence, the three of us staring at luggage like it was evidence in a case no one wanted to try. When Tessa's car finally pulled into the driveway, she didn't park right away. She sat there with the engine running, staring at the house like it had betrayed her. Then she got out. She looked different, tired, dusty, sunburned just enough to show she'd been somewhere fun. Her eyes locked onto the bags, then onto her parents, then onto me. Tessa. What is this? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gesture. Me. Your things. She stepped closer, lowering her voice like this was a negotiation. Tessa, you can't do this. This is our home. I met her eyes. Me. It was. Her gaze flicked to her parents. Panic bled through the cracks now. Tessa. Mom. Dad. This isn't what it looks like. Gail didn't answer. She just shook her head slowly like she was watching something irreversible happen in real time. Tessa turned back to me, desperation sharpening her features. Tessa. Evan, please. Let me explain. I looked past her, at the street, at the neighbors pretending not to stare, at the life she'd been so confident she could manage from multiple angles at once. Then I said the thing she couldn't spin. Me. You told me someone was gone. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. And in that silence, with her bags on the porch and her parents watching, I realized something important. This wasn't the end. It was just the moment she lost control of the story. Tessa recovered fast. She always did. Silence made her uncomfortable, so she filled it with movement. She bent down, grabbed the handle of the nearest suitcase like she was reclaiming territory. Tessa, this is ridiculous. We're not doing this in front of everyone. Me. Then you should have told the truth in private. She straightened slowly, eyes sharp now. The performance mask sliding back into place. Tessa, you're enjoying this. That one almost made me laugh. Me. No, I'm documenting it. Robert shifted beside her. He hadn't spoken yet, which told me he was still deciding whether he was disappointed as a father or furious as a man who'd been lied to without the courtesy of effort. Gail finally found her voice. Gail. Tessa? Your grandma is sitting at lunch wondering why people are texting her condolences. Tessa flinched. Not because of the lie, but because of the humiliation, the public kind, the kind that sticks. Tessa. I panicked. Me. You booked flights. She looked at me like she hadn't expected that level of specificity. Me. You didn't panic. You planned. Her eyes darted to my phone in my hand. She was already calculating what else I might have. What I'd seen. What I knew. Tessa. Can we please go inside? Me. No. That word again. Simple. Effective. I watched her swallow. Watched her realize she was standing outside the house she'd thought was a guarantee. Tessa. Fine. You want the truth? I waited. She lifted her chin. Tessa. I ran into Dylan. Me. At a funeral. Tessa. Not like that. At the festival. He was working with a brand. He invited me. I needed a break. Gail made a small sound like something fragile cracking. Gail. You said you were mourning. Tessa. I didn't want questions. Me. You didn't want consequences. Her face hardened. Tessa. You don't get to judge me. You're not perfect. There it was, the pivot, the reach for balance where none existed. Me. I didn't fake a loss. She stepped closer now, lowering her voice again, trying to pull me back into the private gravity she used when things went wrong. Tessa. You're overreacting. Nothing happened. I tilted my head. Me. Then why lie? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Because the answer was obvious, and saying it out loud would have made it permanent. A car passed slowly. Someone across the street pretended to check their mailbox for the third time. Robert finally spoke. Robert. Get your bags. Tessa snapped toward him. Tessa. Dad. Robert. Now. That stopped her cold. She looked at Gail for support. Gail didn't meet her eyes. Tessa dragged the suitcase toward her car, each step heavy, awkward, real. She shoved it into the trunk too hard, like the sound might scare the moment away. She turned back to me one last time. Tessa, this isn't over. I believed her. Me. No, it's just accurate now. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down without thinking. I saw the name light up on the screen. Dylan. She noticed me noticing. Too late. She got into the car and slammed the door. The engine roared to life, tires spitting gravel as she pulled away like she was escaping a crime scene. Gail sank onto the porch step, suddenly smaller. Gail. I raised her better than this. I sat beside her, the wood creaking under our combined weight. Me. You raised her to look good. That wasn't an insult. It was an observation. Robert stared down the street where Tessa had disappeared. Robert, what are you going to do now? I thought about the live stream, the wristband, the lies stacked like poorly aligned bricks, about Dylan's smile in that video, too confident for a man who thought he was untouchable. I stood up. Me. I'm going to make sure she can't pretend this didn't happen. That night, after her parents left and the house finally went quiet, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and the wristband laid out beside it like a warning label. I replayed the live stream, paused, zoomed, not obsessively, professionally. Dylan's face, the VIP rope, the security badges, the location tags. I recognized the setup immediately. Pier side activation, temporary structures, crowd density issues, emergency lane access. The kind of thing that looks glamorous on social media and collapses the moment someone asks the wrong question. I leaned back in my chair, the refrigerator humming behind me, and felt something settle into place. Not rage, focus. My phone buzzed. A message from a number I hadn't saved yet. Dylan. We need to talk. You're making this bigger than it has to be. I stared at the screen, then typed slowly. Me. You already made it public. I set the phone down and smiled to myself, a thin, humorless curve of the mouth, because I knew something he didn't yet. I wasn't angry enough to be reckless. I was calm enough to be dangerous. Dylan didn't wait for a reply. My phone lit up again almost immediately, the vibration crawling across the table like something alive. Dylan, let's clear. The air. Like adults. Adults. Right. The word men use when they want to sound reasonable while preparing to be neither. I didn't answer. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the sink, watching the reflection in the dark window. I looked the same. That annoyed me. I'd always assumed moments like this came with visible changes. Sunken eyes, shaking hands, some obvious marker that your life had tilted off its axis. Instead, I just looked, focused. I picked up the wristband again, turned it over. The cheap plastic had already creased where she'd taken it off too fast. Proof doesn't have to be dramatic. It just has to exist. I opened my laptop and pulled up the permit database. Public records. Anyone could access them if they knew where to look. Most people don't. They're too busy believing that events appear fully formed, like magic, instead of balanced on a stack of approvals and signatures that can collapse if one piece is wrong. There it was. Pier 9. Temporary activation. Crowd estimate. Moderate. Vendor access. Limited. Emergency lane. Clear at all times. I clicked through the uploaded site photos and smiled because the emergency lane wasn't clear, not even close. I'd walked that pier 100 times. I knew where trucks cheated when they thought no one was watching. I knew which corners security waved through because they didn't want to argue with confident men wearing headsets. I didn't flag anything yet. That would have been premature. You don't end a story by jumping to the last page. I closed the laptop. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Dylan. It was Tessa. Tessa, you don't have to do this. I considered the phrasing. Not "I'm sorry," not "I lied." Just a reminder that I had a choice, and she'd prefer I choose silence. Me. You already did this. Tessa, you're punishing me. Me. I'm correcting the record. A few seconds passed. Then, Tessa, Dylan is furious. I laughed quietly, not out loud, just a breath through my nose. Me. That's between you and him. Her typing bubble appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Tessa, he says you're trying to ruin his life. Me. He should try telling the truth. It's very relaxing. No response after that. I went to bed early, not because I was tired, but because there was nothing else to do that wouldn't turn into rumination. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was shallow and sharp-edged. I dreamed of crowds, of ropes snapping, of people smiling while standing in places they weren't supposed to stand. In the morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from an unfamiliar number, then a voicemail. Dylan's voice filled the room like it owned the space. Dylan, Evan, listen, we're getting off on the wrong foot. I think we should meet face to face. No drama. Man to man, man to man. Another favorite phrase, always said by men who want to intimidate without witnesses. I deleted the voicemail. At work, Nina was already waiting for me, leaning against my desk with her arms crossed. Nina, so, is your funeral widow back from the past? Me, very much alive. Nina winced. That's rough. Me, it's educational. She studied my face. Nina, you're planning something. Me, I'm reviewing public safety concerns. Her mouth twitched. Nina, of course you are. I logged into the system and pulled up Pier 9 again. Nina glanced at the screen, then back at me. Nina, that's Dylan's setup, right? Me, looks like it. Nina, you can't. Me, I'm not doing anything I'm not allowed to do. That was the truth, the cleanest kind. Later that afternoon, my phone rang again. Dylan, I answered this time. Me, you have 1 minute. Dylan didn't bother with pleasantries. Dylan, you need to back off. Me, or, Dylan, or things get unpleasant. I pictured him pacing, phone pressed to his ear, jaw tight. A man used to momentum, unused to resistance. Me, are you threatening me? A pause. He'd caught himself. Dylan, I'm saying you're misinterpreting the situation. Me, you stood behind my fiancée at a festival while she lied about a funeral. Dylan, she told me you were basically over. There it was, the lie he'd chosen. Me, then why hide? Silence stretched, not the scrambling kind this time, the calculating one. Dylan, let's meet. Me, no. Dylan, you afraid? I smiled. Me, I prefer witnesses. I hung up before he could answer. That evening, I drove down to the pier. Not to confront anyone, not to start anything, to observe. The place was already buzzing with prep crews, trucks idled where they shouldn't, cables snaked across walkways without covers, temporary fencing leaned at optimistic angles. I took photos, not sneakily, openly, the way you do when you have nothing to hide. A security guy noticed me watching and walked over. Security, you with the city? I showed him my badge. Me, just checking access lanes. He nodded, immediately tense. Security, everything's fine. I looked past him at a delivery truck blocking the painted red zone. Me. It will be. Once that moves. He turned, swore under his breath, waved the truck forward. I didn't say anything else. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Dylan. Dylan, you're making a mistake. I typed my reply carefully. Me. Mistakes are unintentional. Then I put the phone away and sat there for a moment, watching the sun drop toward the water, the pier glowing with the promise of a night that was supposed to be effortless. Somewhere between the sound check and the lighting test, Dylan would realize something. This wasn't about jealousy. This was about gravity. And gravity always wins. The night of the event arrived dressed like a lie. Clean lights, expensive smiles, the illusion of control. From a distance, Pier 9 looked flawless. From up close, it was a stack of compromises wearing confidence. I parked 2 blocks away and walked in. No hoodie, no attempt at invisibility. Badge clipped, posture neutral. People like Dylan never expect the quiet approach. They expect shouting, fists, or threats that sound good in movies and fall apart in daylight. The bass rolled through the boards under my feet. Vendors rushed. Staff yelled into headsets. Everyone was busy pretending nothing could go wrong. I spotted Dylan near the VIP rope. Headset on, jaw tight, performing authority for a cluster of sponsors who nodded like they were watching a magician. He looked good in the way men do when they believe the room belongs to them. I didn't go to him. I went to the back. Loading docks tell the truth, venues don't. Cables taped badly, trucks angled where they shouldn't be. A generator coughing like it wanted to shut down quietly without making a scene. I took photos. Slowly. Clearly. The kind of photos that don't get dismissed as out of context. A security supervisor stepped into my path, hand raised. He said, "Sir, this area is restricted." I showed my badge. I said, "Emergency lane access review." His eyes flicked down, then back up. He swallowed. He said, "Everything's under control." I looked past him at a box truck parked squarely in the red zone, engine running, exhaust blowing straight into a temporary tent. I said, "Not yet." He hesitated. Then he waved the driver forward, barking into his radio. The truck lurched, tires squealing against wood. One correction, small, legitimate. The kind that makes people nervous because it proves someone is paying attention. My phone buzzed. "Dylan, where are you?" I ignored it. I walked the perimeter, counting heads the way you learn to do when crowd estimates are lies and optimism gets people hurt. Too many bodies, too few exits. Barriers shifted just enough to widen VIP sightlines at the cost of safety. I stopped at the fire marshal's posted plan and compared it to reality. Different. That was when Dylan found me. He didn't shout. He smiled, too wide, too practiced. He stepped into my space like we were old friends who'd run into each other at a reunion. He said, "You really want to do this here?" I said, "I'm working." He laughed, low and dismissive, and leaned closer. He said, "You're embarrassing yourself." I met his eyes. I said, "Move the second truck." His smile twitched. He said, "You don't have authority." I gestured with my chin toward the red paint, the posted plan, the camera mounted above the dock. I said, "Try me." He looked around. Sponsors, staff, phones already lifting, hungry for content. He made a decision the way men do when they think force is cheaper than compliance. He stepped closer. He said, "You need to leave." I didn't move. Behind him, a security guard shifted his weight. Another camera angle blinked red. Dylan reached out. Not a punch, not a shove. A grab at my sleeve. A test. I stepped back, raised my hands loud enough for witnesses. I said, "Don't touch me." He froze, realized. Too late. I didn't strike him. I didn't need to. I said, "Clear the lane. Now." For a moment, the music swallowed everything. Then the supervisor barked orders. The second truck rolled. Barriers slid. Staff scrambled. Dylan's authority evaporated in inches. His phone buzzed. He checked it. Color drained from his face. I leaned in, close enough that only he could hear me over the bass. I said, "This is what accountability feels like." His jaw worked. He wanted to say something threatening. He wanted to be impressive. He said nothing. I walked away before he could find a new angle. Out front, the crowd surged, blissfully unaware of how close inconvenience comes to catastrophe. I watched for a minute, then turned back toward my car. My phone buzzed again. "Tessa, please tell me you're not there." I didn't answer, because I was already driving away and because something had shifted. Dylan hadn't just been embarrassed. He'd been exposed, to himself most of all. Men like him survive on the belief that rules are flexible if you're charming enough. That belief cracks loudly when it breaks. By morning, the emails started. Subject lines that pretended to be neutral and failed. Clarification requested. Vendor compliance review. Temporary suspension pending. I read them without satisfaction. Satisfaction is loud. This felt quiet, inevitable. Tessa showed up at the house just after noon. Not dressed for reconciliation, dressed for damage control. She stood on the porch like a lawyer waiting to be invited in. She said, "We need to talk." I said, "You need to listen." That startled her. She wasn't used to that order. She said, "Dylan says you set him up." I tilted my head. I said, "I asked him to follow the rules." She scoffed, reflexive. She said, "You're ruining lives over a mistake." I looked at her, really looked, and saw the same calculation I'd heard in her voice at the funeral. I said, "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. Then you made another one to hide it." Her eyes hardened. She said, "I did what I had to do." There it was, the line that explains everything. I said, "Then accept what comes with it." She stepped closer, lowering her voice, reaching for the old gravity. She said, "This isn't you." I smiled, thin and tired. I said, "It is. You just weren't paying attention." Her phone buzzed. She checked it. Panic flickered. She said, "He's losing sponsors." I said, "Actions have momentum." She stared at me, realizing, too late, that the story she'd been managing had slipped out of her hands and found a better editor. She said, "You're enjoying this." I shook my head. I said, "I'm finishing it." She opened her mouth to argue. Then her phone rang again. She answered, listened, went very still. When she hung up, her voice was smaller. She said, "My parents know everything." I nodded. I said, "Good." She looked at the house behind me, at the life she'd assumed would wait, unchanged no matter what she did elsewhere. She said, "You can't just erase me." I met her eyes. I said, "I'm not. I'm letting everyone see you." She stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked back to her car without another word. I watched her leave, and for the first time since the live stream, since the lie, since the wristband on my bed, I felt something settle. Not peace, not relief, alignment. The story was no longer crooked, and it wasn't done yet. The boardroom smelled like citrus cleaner and money. Glass table, neutral art, the kind of room where people lower their voices automatically because power prefers quiet. I took a seat near the end, not because I had to, but because it made people underestimate how prepared I was. Dylan arrived late. Of course he did. He walked in with a smile that was already failing, suit a little too sharp for a man pretending nothing was wrong. Sponsors watched him with polite confusion, the kind that precedes distance. He didn't look at me at first. When he did, it was fast, sharp, like checking a wound. The chairwoman cleared her throat. She said, "We've received multiple concerns regarding last night's event." Dylan jumped in immediately. He said, "Minor miscommunications, all resolved." I waited. She looked at the printed packet in front of her. She said, "Emergency lane obstruction, unauthorized barrier movement, crowd count exceeding permit." Dylan laughed once, too loud. He said, That's standard event chaos. I leaned forward slightly, not enough to dominate, just enough to enter the conversation. I said, chaos isn't a defense. Every eye in the room turned. I didn't rush. I placed my phone on the table and slid it forward. Not dramatically, just available. I said, all observations were documented in real time. Public space. Posted regulations. Silence. The chairwoman glanced at the photos, the timestamps, the annotated plan that didn't match reality. She said, Mr. Crowe, why were vendors directed to ignore the posted emergency plan? Dylan opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. He said, I don't recall. I said, you do, because you corrected it when asked. That landed harder than an accusation, because it implied guilt without stating it. A sponsor shifted in his seat. Another asked quietly, is this why our logo was visible when the lane was blocked? Dylan's jaw tightened. He looked at me now. Really looked. The way men do when they realize charm has an expiration date. The chairwoman folded her hands. She said, we're suspending your contract pending review. Dylan stood. He said, you can't be serious. No one answered. He looked around, waiting for backup. Found none. When he turned to leave, his shoulder clipped mine. On purpose, not hard, not dramatic, just enough. I stepped back immediately, hands up, voice clear. I said, don't touch me. Cameras saw it. Witnesses heard it. Dylan froze. Then he leaned in, low and venomous. He said, you think you've won? I didn't raise my voice. I said, this isn't a game. Security moved closer. Dylan straightened, smoothed his jacket, and walked out without another word. The meeting dissolved quietly, like embarrassment prefers. Outside, the sky had gone flat and gray. Tessa was waiting near the steps, phone in hand, face tight with practiced remorse. She said, you destroyed him. I stopped in front of her. I said, no, I stopped covering for him. She shook her head. She said, you always have to be right. I looked at her then, really looked, and saw it clearly. Not the lie, the belief behind it. I said, you lied about loss. Like it was a scheduling conflict. Her mouth tightened. She said, I was protecting my future. I said, you were renting it. She flinched. Her phone buzzed again. She checked it. Color drained. She said, they're pulling out, all of them. I nodded. I said, that's what happens when stories collapse under weight. She stepped closer, voice dropping. She said, you could stop this. I shook my head. I said, I already did. That night, the pier lit up again. Not for celebration, for salvage. Dylan was there, trying to look in control, barking into his headset, trying to rearrange a world that had already decided it was done with him. I walked the back corridor, the one he'd used to feel important, the one he'd assumed no one else noticed. He heard my footsteps and turned. His smile didn't come this time. He said, you follow me now? I said, you parked in a restricted zone. Again. He laughed, brittle. He said, you're obsessed. I stepped closer, close enough that he could see there was no anger left. I said, you touched something that wasn't yours. He glanced toward the crowd, the lights, the sponsors pretending not to watch. He said, say whatever you want. She chose me. I nodded once. I said, she chose a lie that required a funeral. That did it. He lunged, not a punch, not violence, a grab, wild and desperate. I stepped aside. He stumbled, caught himself on a railing, eyes wide as security surged forward. I didn't move. I said, don't. He froze, hands up, breathing hard. Security took his arms. As they led him away, his confidence finally broke. He said, this isn't over. I leaned in just enough. I said, it is for me. Out front, Tessa stood near the edge of the crowd, watching it all unravel. When she saw Dylan being escorted away, something in her face collapsed, no drama left to perform. She walked toward me, stopped a few feet away. She said, You could have been kinder. I thought of the wristband, the live stream, the word funeral sitting in my inbox like a joke written in ash. I said, you could have been honest. The music swelled behind us, lights flashed, people cheered for reasons that had nothing to do with us. She opened her mouth to say something else. I turned away. Behind me, someone called her name. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The pier shook under the weight of 1,000 people dancing, and for the first time since the lie, the ground under my feet felt solid.